Hi there, I'm Tom Field, Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. I want to welcome you back to our latest installment in the Cybersecurity Leadership Series. This is where we bring together CEOs and CISOs to talk about the business and security issues that are driving risk and risk decisions in all of our organizations today. So right from the start here, I want to introduce our panel from the CEO community. Please welcome Kristen Hazelwood. She's General Manager and VP with BigFix. Kristen. We've got Bob Lyons, CEO with AlertLogic.
That's me, everybody.
From the CISO community, Summer Fowler. She's the CIO and the CISO with Argo AI.
Hello.
Got Anne-Marie Scale, former CISO with Axiom Law. And we've got Don Cox, CISO with Mednax.
Hello.
And Allie Mellon, security strategist in the office of the CISO at Cybereason. Allie, thank you so much for joining us today. So to frame our first conversation here, among the biggest threat vectors during this lockdown, we've had new waves of more complex malware that use devices or users as proxies in order to reach more valuable assets in corporate networks. So today we want to address some of the key exposures and how we're responding to and preparing to defend against the impact of these threats. We're going to start with the state of threat vector intelligence. Some context here. When we combine diverse home environments with evolving security policies, shared Wi-Fi passwords, IoT, quickly built infrastructure to ensure uninterrupted business continuity, and we've gotten that, we get to the point where one vulnerability, one misstep in configuration can open the door to malicious actors. And those are a lot of potential doors we've got to open. So my question, and Bob and Allie, I'd love for you to take this first and for others to weigh in as well. While collected intelligence and knowledge have traditionally served as a reliable source of truth for protection, in this new reality, can we rely on any advanced technologies to assist in predicting potential threat actors before they're known, before they're identified in their intel feeds? If so, what are these technologies and how are they now being implemented?
So I think the notion of how do I have better security and how do I get in front of threats is not a new concept for anybody. The question is, how do we do so in a world that, as you pointed out, Tom, is getting more complex, faster and faster, and by the way, the bad guys are getting more sophisticated as well. So in a world with increasing complexity and most of our digital assets flow freely outside of the four walls, the protective four walls of our companies, how do we stay in front of that? So first, I think you have to shift your mindset away from the notion that many companies have relied on over the last 15, 20 years is that we can build a good perimeter. The idea that a perimeter is going to protect companies anymore is really, akin to thinking that, building a castle and having a wall and a moat and guards on the wall is going to protect the castle. That only works when the assets can stay inside the four walls. So you have to shift your mindset away from that, and you have to recognize you're never going to have as much knowledge as you would need to have a perimeter strategy. You're never going to have as much control as you need to have a perimeter strategy. Second, how do you get better security then? It's all about connecting more dots. How do I connect more dots in my environment? And the way to connect more dots is essentially to find ways through technology, analytics, and expertise to have more breadth of coverage, more depth of coverage, and more frequency of coverage. And that's kind of how we think about it. How do we expand the breadth of our coverage? How do we expand the depth? And how do we expand the frequency? And to do that, it means improving security is largely a function of how well your technology, analytics, and expertise can come together seamlessly to do that. So your technology, for example, needs to be able to help shrink your attack surface. And to do that means you need to be able to seamlessly integrate different workloads, cloud, network, endpoint, applications, and collect data and telemetry from those environments. Secondly, you need analytics that can take that big data, use machine learning and rich analytics to be able to find the needle in the haystack and find where those anomalies are and do that at scale. And remembering that you're not any longer looking for known actors. It's not about signature. It's not about knowing, things that happened in the past. It's about understanding anomalies in behavior and understanding where behavior is different than what it should be in more of a real-time basis. And then last, you need to bring together expertise that can look at that, give it context, and understand that, hey, this is something that we really need to be worried about, and we need to be able to connect more dots with that expertise and drive it together. So to answer your question, Tom, I think it's really a combination of what technology can you use to drive more breadth of coverage, more depth of coverage, machine learning, analytics, and to be able to seamlessly integrate those tools with your experts or experts that you can source to be able to bring that context around your environment and do that continuously and continuously improve that environment.
I think this is one of the reasons that we're seeing a lot of vendors jump on the XDR train as well to try and really connect everything. Another aspect that I think is super important, especially since we're all working remotely, is things like mobile devices. We're seeing a lot of mobile device attacks right now, and it's going to be critical, especially as we think about how we're moving back into the office, to consider these endpoints, these non-traditional endpoints, that we also need to defend in addition to your typical laptop. But I've found for most organizations, we're seeing a lot of people really work and become endpoint centric in order to defend those endpoints that aren't in the office, but mobile is kind of getting cast aside from that.
It's become very frantic, right? A lot of us in the security community, we not only have okay, let's go remote, but now we also have a lot of people that are starting to try to sell products. This will solve your COVID problems, and this, works on remote working, work from home and helps us solve those issues. One thing we do need to remember is that understanding the crown jewels of each of our organizations is really important so that we can focus. We don't have unlimited resources. We don't have, the time, all the people, and all the money in the world. So to use Bob's analogy, even if we were trying to build a perimeter or a defense in-depth strategy, right? And so we're trying to make sure that we don't just say, here's a castle with a moat, but we have this defense in depth. We are trying to protect those things that are most critical to our organizations. So thinking about, is that a certain database of information? Is that a source code? Is that information about our employee base? And then focus on that and say, what can I do to make sure that in any given circumstance, I can trace what could possibly happen and go wrong to that crown jewel for my organization? Then I have a focus. I have a way to make sure that I am prioritizing what I'm paying attention to. And that's also going to align with your business strategy. For example, some organizations would be able to turn off external access during non-business hours, right? That would be great. You could then eliminate the ability for someone to reach in. I'm working across 9 time zones with developers, and they work at all hours of the night. So I can't do that, but I can come up with different strategies to make sure that it aligns with both my business objectives and the crown jewels of my organization.
I think organizations need to take a step back and take a look at how they're doing business. For years and years and years, it was lock everything down, and we told you what you could use from an application perspective and how you could get there and what you can do. And then over the years, we've grown to everybody can have access to everything. So I'm a fan of, what are the things that an organization is doing that are revenue generating, business activities, and certain people, marketing, have to have access to social media and those kinds of things. But it makes it easier, going back to that conversation about reducing the attack vector or the threat vector. Think about the TV. Years ago, everything was live until people started slipping with their curse words, and now everything's kind of delayed by 10 or 15 seconds. So how do we do that with cyber technology, where when a person takes an action, it's kind of monitored? We always complained about encryption because there wasn't enough speed in computers. Well, we've kind of overcome that. And I totally agree that the user behavior analytics, automation, threat intelligence are all necessary in order for us to cope and deal with like we said earlier, millions of people trying to get it right just once. And then the key is people. How do we train people from kindergarten all the way through their senior years to be safer on the internet and networks?
I think as much as businesses are looking forward to having employees coming back into the offices, I think having so many people working remote for so long is going to materially change how many people do return to the office. And remote work is going to be a very dominant factor moving forward in the work environment. And with that, I think we need to really be looking at how we're educating our colleagues to ensure that they have appropriate security at home. And for small and medium-sized businesses, the idea of having VPNs and having everything, all the cloud SaaS applications behind VPNs, is not necessarily feasible. So when we're looking at an environment where we can't necessarily enforce where those access points and how those access points are coming into our crown jewels, as was mentioned earlier, I think it really does boil down to making sure that we have education provided to the employees. And I've heard, I've talked with other CISOs that have talked about creating education programs within their companies and even offering some limited technology support to their home-based colleagues so that they can help ensure that they're computing as securely as possible.
And while I agree education is a critical piece, you also need to have the safety nets within the infrastructure to help maintain continuous compliance of those endpoints. It's so easy working from home for one of your children to ask to borrow your laptop for a moment, and you come back and lo and behold, something's happened on your system. So it's very important to have tools in place that ensure continuous compliance. Very simple, right? Let's not overlook the fundamentals, right? Having we know most breaches are caused by misconfigurations in the system, and there's a lot of fundamentals that can be addressed simply by having continuous compliance of those endpoints, no matter where they are.
I'm going to shift gears for a moment here and talk about COVID-themed attacks. As you all know, COVID-19 isn't just a pandemic, it's a cybersecurity threat vector today. Some context, our community has seen numerous attack vectors that have used COVID-19 themes either as bait or even as a way to conceal malicious activity from identification, from detection. An example, North Korean state hackers sent COVID-19 themed phishing emails to more than 5 million businesses and individuals in Singapore, Japan, the US, South Korea, India, and elsewhere in an attempt to steal personal and financial data. So my question, and Kristen, Summer, I'd love for you to answer this first and then pass off to your colleagues. What are we doing to leapfrog these new email phishing techniques? And is it purely a human problem, a matter of training the users, or are there technology solutions that could intervene and help? Kristen?
I absolutely believe it's a combination of training and technology. So often we see that, you have to keep in mind that the remote workforce that we have today, they're not all IT professionals. They're not concerned about security. And then you add the heightened emotional aspects around COVID, and people are more susceptible to phishing attacks. So it's even more important that we have the proper IT and security infrastructure in place to help prevent those. So yes, education is important, but we need to be aware and mindful of human nature, right? There's going to be some slip-ups. And ultimately, phishing attacks are only possible if they're able to exploit an underlying vulnerability in an environment. So it's absolutely critical that organizations have tools to help provide the visibility to any of the vulnerabilities in their environment so they can understand where they have risk, so they can take the action to remediate those vulnerabilities and help provide the protection for the end user.
I also think it's a matter of getting creative in how we as security professionals do both the training and the testing. We hear a lot about things like phishing campaigns, right? And we'll do them quarterly, or we'll do them at whatever cadence our organization says, but maybe, or what we establish. But then thinking also about the fact that many of us have multi-factor in place. Have we tested sending just a random multi-factor acceptance to our employee base? And how many people would blindly accept that? So we need to get out of even just the normal testing that we've done. There are technologies, secure email gateways can be put in place. We want to make sure also that we've done all of our right DMARCs, DKIMs, all the various, acronyms that we have in place that we want to make sure we are up to speed on. And then making sure that we communicate that out to our staff. Maybe even because we're in a remote situation, we change how we operate in terms of our communication. Perhaps we go to internal messaging rather than emails, and we make it a policy that there are no links in emails at all. right? And so that then we would have, at least internally, you're not going to be phished via a link in an email, or you have an internal link that goes to an intranet if you need to find information. So I think we will absolutely have to see that combination. As for the trends, absolutely. We see the COVID themed activities, and we have to remember it's not just COVID themed emails. It's also things like download this COVID-19 tracker to make sure that you're safe. And now you have made available everything that's on your personal or work mobile device. And so making sure that we stay on top of what we see in terms of trends in capability, because a lot of these are legitimate. And we want to make sure that we've put the right technology and functionality in place. But for everything that is great from a functional standpoint, someone is trying to exploit it. And so we need to look for those exploits as well.
I'm going to throw something out there that's a little controversial, given we have some people that develop software. So I was in a presentation one time, and a person made the statement, many years ago, auto manufacturers lobbied Congress against putting seatbelts in cars because it was increased cost. And eventually, Congress said they must go in, or we're going to start fining people, and you're going to get in trouble. Fast forward to 1900, the 1990s, the 2000s, and we're just developing software all over the place. But developers aren't being held accountable for the bugs that they put in the software and the damage that it causes the organization. So maybe at some point in the future, we get to a point where if people are held accountable for the bugs they're putting in, that would be another way to try to stop some of the threats and things that are occurring. From a healthcare perspective, I'm living it. I get the emails that say, "Hey, we can get you masks and gowns and all of the different kinds of things that you would need as a healthcare organization during the event." And for us, what it came down to was just telling everybody, you have to be suspicious of everything. We're using some good endpoint email tools, but we talk about all these email tools. Person clicks on one link and they lose their password. Some of these threat actors are just sitting, waiting for days before they come back in and use it again, and then send it, a multitude of emails out to people. So how do we get to a point where we norm the person and we start seeing things that aren't possible, locations where they're trying to access, and some other things like geo-blocking and those kinds of things put in it. So definitely a defense in depth is what I'm thinking needs to be in the future.
The mixed strategy of training and tech is critical, just because we know that this is not 100% going to be resolved by the end user. And at the end of the day, security is there to serve the business. And even doing things like taking links out of emails, which would help a lot, can be very difficult for the end user. And I'm always thinking about that and trying to consider different ways that security can actually be the thing that serves the business for the better instead of being a blocker.
Yes, people and technology are really critical. From a business standpoint, all of us also need to be very cognizant of the policy arm. We should make sure that we are protecting our organizations by making updates to policy if and when necessary. We often talk about going back and updating policy on an annual basis or during a trigger event. I would say COVID-19 pandemic is a really good trigger event. And as CEOs and CISOs, we should be working together with our legal and compliance departments and those stakeholders to make sure that we have the right reviews of our policy in place so that they are enforceable. And also, so as Ali pointed out really well, we want to make them so that they are something that the end user can actually meet. And so we're going to have a lot of groups involved and stakeholders involved in updating our policies as well, which I do view as that third leg of the tripod in how we protect ourselves.
Why is phishing done so often? Because it works, right? Pretty simply. And why does it work? I recently read that 2/3 of all breaches start with some exploitation of a user's credentials, typically phishing, but other things as well, but largely phishing. And so all the training is important, and the analytics and the preventative measures that we do, having links and emails, those are all important. And, because phishing is really about opening doors. And if you can close doors and have less doors, obviously you're going to reduce your exposure. But the fact of the matter is the bad actors also have analytics, and they also have technology, and they're getting better and better at it. What's really interesting in my years of doing this, and I look at times when people have been exploited because they've been phished, when you're rational, you sit back and you look at it, you say, how could that person ever think that that was something they should click on? And what you find out is that what people doing phishing campaigns do is they play on emotions, and human beings react differently when they have an emotional connection to something, and their emotions overseed their rationality. So whether it's COVID, which is a very emotional topic right now, whether it's social justice, whether it's political campaign that you're associated with, whether it's a cause you're involved with, they find things that trigger you for your emotions to overreach your rational. And that's always going to happen as long as, human beings have been emotional, that's happened. So the controversial thing is to recognize that we have to do all these preventive measures to close more doors and have less, avenues in, but we have to accept the fact that people are going to get through a few of these doors. And so the question really becomes is how do you have a backstop to protect against that? And it goes back to what I was saying earlier that, it's really about having, connecting more dots and having your technology. If you think about security over the last 15 years, it's largely been, I've got a problem over here and I'm going to throw a tool at it. I've got a problem over here and I'm going to throw a tool at it. But if you look at most breaches, they start in one place and they migrate to another place. And then when they finally show up and create a lot of damage, they bounced around in different environments, and each individual tool had no ability to capture that behavior across the different tools. And so I think ultimately we have to do all the things we talked about and obviously close as many doors as possible. But the real way to get in front of this is to recognize that some people are going to get through, and it's going to get harder and harder to prevent against that. And so what you need to do is have deeper analytics and deeper technology that can connect more dots across your environment, and just know that it's going to happen. And the question is, how do you get in front of it before it can do damage?
Let's talk about cloud computing. I think back to February, and probably every organization I spoke to would say that when it came to multi-cloud environments, they were dipping their toes in the water. Then came March and they all got pushed in over their heads. So now everybody is in cloud computing and probably in a multi-cloud environment. So my question is, and Anne-Marie, I want to start this with you and then hear from others. Given our increasing reliance on the cloud, which issue is more important or most important from a cybersecurity perspective? Is it the over-reliance on providers and insufficient diligence on behalf of the end users? Is it third-party reporting gaps, like who does the SOC 2? Or is it the technical limitations like MFA or configuration management? Anne-Marie, you win. You get to tackle this one first. Which is more critical?
I really think it's a blend of them. Definitely the importance of doing an assessment of your cloud providers before jumping in has been something that I think has been a concern for businesses for quite some time, because it's so easy for individual employees to go ahead and sign up for a freemium application. And then it just becomes, really difficult for the businesses to wrap their arms around really what they're securing in the cloud and where their data is sprawling as a result of that. I do think that configuration is also critical, and we've heard it earlier in this conversation that misconfiguration or configuration management is definitely a vulnerability where, there's definitely instances of developers or whomever putting something out there and thinking, oh, I'm just going to throw this up there for just temporary and the password's password. And, it all goes to, bad places in the handbasket. So, I think bottom line is definitely doing an assessment and understanding who your cloud providers are, and also looking at the configurations for security.
It's not only just all three, but to actually turn it back into, what we as organizations must do to continuously monitor and manage all three becomes really important. Because, you're looking at the cloud provider and saying, all right, do they have the right controls in place? And then you're looking at configuration and access management and architecture. And to be honest, all of those things change over time. And so even if we have it right at this moment in time, 3 weeks from now, that might not be right. So have you established within your security program those internal audits to check for changes? So are you monitoring and alerting on configuration changes? Are you monitoring and alerting on elevated permissions? Or are you monitoring and alerting on what is made available publicly public facing within your cloud environment? And then are you auditing against that? So having a risk or compliance team that comes in once a month and says, okay, the following 17 people had elevated permissions. Did they receive the right thumbs up to get those permissions? And so really it's also a matter of not just making sure we get it right now, but putting that continuous process in place to ensure that when it changes, we know why, we agree with it, or we can backtrack.
If your company or your startup or wherever you work is built on a culture of really moving fast and that being your focus, you can miss a lot of things like that. And so at least in the security team, you need to build this culture of consistently reviewing things and having these processes in place and not maybe jumping over things that seem like they might be too difficult in order to get to something that you think is more important in the moment. I think that that's super critical.
So many of the organizations that we work with, we find that they have a rock solid, traditional on-prem IT security infrastructure. They know where everything is. They have visibility and control over everything. And the cloud has been treated almost like the Wild West, right? So you'll see the teams go, oh, if I want to put this on my traditional on-prem, I have to work through all these processes, but I can put it in the cloud tomorrow and it'll be, up and running and it's a freebie. Well, it's not a freebie, right? And so we're seeing more and more organizations, understanding that and understanding that it's a shared responsibility model. There's things that you as an organization need to do. There's things that the cloud providers are bringing to the table, and it's making sure that those come together. And, step one is having visibility. There's many organizations that I go into and speak with that they don't know what their teams are running in the cloud, and you can't control and protect when you don't know. So you need tools to help bring that visibility. There needs to be more education, and we are seeing more and more organizations understanding that in the cloud there's more configurations, there's more risk, there's no hall pass.
I think that shared responsibility model is at the crux of why companies struggle. If you think about a shared, I'm amazed at how many times I have a conversation with somebody who says, well, we're moving to the public cloud, so our security is going to be taken care of. That couldn't be further from the truth. It's a shared responsibility model. And when you think about a shared responsibility model, that means that you have to understand end-to-end handoffs. There's a lot of virtual handoffs. And also the cloud grew up in a very grassroots way where IT guys were going out and doing stuff and configuring things. And many companies, as Kristen pointed out, don't fully yet understand how best to manage security in that kind of environment. It's different. You do have to take ownership for security. It is different, but there are a lot of handoffs. And we saw last year a pretty significant public breach with a large financial institution that largely boiled back to a configuration issue that was very preventable, but snuck through because of the issues that we're talking about here. So cloud isn't really immune, it's just different. The biggest recommendation I'd make is really having a set of capabilities that continuously monitors your environment, both from a configuration as well as an activity standpoint, because it is a wild, wild west environment, as Kristen pointed out.
Discovery is number one. There was a term that was coined a couple of years ago, shadow IT, which is just a disaster for organizations. I get the productivity piece. But talent is another thing. You mentioned it in the beginning, right? Just dipping your toe in. You don't dip your toe into this. You have to go into it with full knowledge, understanding, and the talent to actually understand what you're doing inside this environment. There's so many switches on the back end of, pick your provider that you're using that even using automation, you can open up public IP addresses to things that you didn't intend to, and unless there's governance involved and the automation is constantly reviewed and locked down, and there's tools put in place, it's going to compromise your data, and you'll be on the evening news or in the paper like so many we see on a daily basis. And the last thing is communication. I can't count the number of times where a change was made either by the co-location facility. They went from one provider to another provider, and I didn't know about it. So, lesson learned, put that in your contract. You have to be notified. But these as a services, they're constantly getting alerts and bulletins for, we're going to stop doing this, and we're going to start doing that, and we're going to start doing this. And unless you're following those things and somebody's reviewing them and looking at them, something's going to get exposed in your environment just accidentally. Basically, you would think no fault of your own, but so talent is a big part of being successful in the cloud.
to talk about credential threats now. Now, with the shift in the increase in remote work over the course of this year, it's focused attackers on VPNs, focused them on cloud services. And yet, if you look at penetration testing data from just last year, it showed that many compromises already were focused on credentials as the best way to get access to cloud infrastructure. So my question, and Don, I'd love for you to tackle this first. What have you found to be the most effective approach in combating this threat to credentials in a world that is increasingly dependent upon remote work? And remote work is not going to be the exception. It's going to be the rule going forward.
Quick answer, I found nothing. I have no idea how to combat it, and I'm starving for help. The only thing I can think of going forward is passwordless. How do we get to a point where passwords don't exist anymore, and it's either a combination of biometrics and unknown information, or just something newer, in order to get us away from passwords? There's a really good video that I saw the other day where it was a comedian did a speech about NIST guidelines, and he said, so when we first started passwords, just having a word was enough to secure it because we had to. And then we got really sophisticated and we capitalized the first letter. And then we even got more sophisticated and we put an exclamation point at the end of it. Okay, how many people are going to go home and change their password today? It was really funny, that kind of thing. But that's the reality. People are just creatures of habit. They look for the easy way out. So I don't have an answer as to what's going to solve it, but I think passwordless is definitely a step in the right direction.
As we move to new approaches without passwords, but if we're talking about just the immediate need, where we all do have passwords, I would say it then becomes some of the discussion we've had earlier about least privilege. So ensuring that your crown jewels are accessible only by the few systems and people, processes that are necessary, and then enforcing that those systems, people, and processes are only using those admin credentials when necessary. So if you have a developer or you have an IT person who is an admin, he or she should not be using those admin credentials for every job. You also may want to put in place not just two-factor, but potentially a third factor right now when using those admin credentials. So a couple of little quick things that we could do in the now, but I do agree with Don that we're going to need to move to something beyond just, capitalize my pet's name, exclamation point.
Stronger passwords, user training, all of the typical things that we see. And then I think we're of course seeing people move towards zero trust. Which is just going to be more and more important as we move forward.
I'll use an analogy that I think is pretty relevant. A few years ago, I had the opportunity I spent a lot of time in Israel, and I had the opportunity to talk to the minister of what's equivalent to Homeland Security. And we had a conversation about how they manage security, because as we all know, it's an important part of Israel's existence. And they said one of the biggest things that they had to learn is that if you build a security strategy based on trying to control the things that are uncontrollable and knowing the things that are unknowable, you're going to fail. And so what they basically assume is that, it's important to have borders and all the things that protect, bad actors from coming into the country. But they start with the assumption that there are bad actors in the country, and they have to monitor for that and look for those activities. And I think that's a great analogy for us in this new world where people are virtual. You can't control the environment your employees are working in. It's non-controllable, and you can't know all the factors that are going to potentially exploit them. It's unknowable. And so really the answer has to be getting to a point where you can, shrink your attack surface by having technology that can integrate data across your attack surface and big data analytics that can really look for those anomalies and assume that people are going to get through, and how do you find those quicker? And it really becomes, better insight and better monitoring with your environment in a more robust way.
Not only just getting ahead of the problem and figuring out how to stop the attacks from happening, but especially for the CEOs and CISOs in the crowd right now, thinking about response capability. I don't know if the numbers right now are true that ransomware attacks are more prevalent, but I'm certainly reading about more in the news and about even vendors that I work with. I think about the fact that right now there are 1,000 employees plus in my company, and we're working in 1,000 plus different locations. If we had an attack that took our systems offline, we need a way to get in touch with each other to do that response capability. So I do urge anyone out there listening right now, what would you do in the event that you were the victim of a credential stuffing attack and now your systems are brought offline? How would you get in touch with each other? You need to have a mechanism right now to get in touch with the most important people for response that isn't advertised on an existing system, because you don't want someone to be able to get in and now be a part of your discussions because they're inside of your system. So think about that. I think, thinking not only just from the prevention standpoint, but be prepared in the event that something does occur, especially because we're not in an office together. And we also can't necessarily travel. So where we would all get together for a war room, potentially in a hotel in a city somewhere, even that's not possible. And so really think about your strategy for response and recovery as well.
One of the first things we did at Cybereason when we all moved to remote was have a security exercise and see how the entire company would react to that type of event. And it was so beneficial for our security team, for individuals on other teams, even from things like marketing and customer success, just to really understand how they would react if there was an incident in this remote environment, which is something that we're just not used to, or we haven't been.
Moving towards a passwordless environment, helping users understand ways that they can set secure passwords, enabling single sign-on MFA where available. So I think a lot of it, a lot of the challenge users have is the number of passwords that they have to manage and maintain and presumably memorize. And so how are we helping them through that? Whether it's suggesting password management technologies, enabling single sign-on, or enabling MFA, because until we can get to a passwordless environment, these are the technologies that are available to us.
It starts with having, we are going to have passwords for the foreseeable future here, even though we definitely want to move away from those. So it's making sure that we have secure and enforceable password policies, multi-factor, layering in those behavioral analytics, as well as the principles of least privilege. So that's the first line of defense. And then, there's been some discussion about response and making sure that you do have a way to respond once you start to see one of these attacks happening. How do you quarantine systems? How do you get your organization together to respond? So it's like many of the discussions that we've had today, the answer is holistic. You have to look at many aspects to protect employees' credentials.
Well, folks, it's been an excellent discussion. It is time to have some wrap-up comments here. I want to ask each of you, take out your crystal balls. As you look ahead to 2021, what are going to be the most critical components of your cybersecurity roadmap? Now, think about it. We've talked about phishing. We've talked about cloud security. Just had a conversation about credential threats and about the passwordless future. There's so much we've talked about here. If you're to narrow it down, what are you most focused on as part of your cybersecurity roadmap as you look to the year ahead?
Bringing together the IT and security teams. So often the security teams have the knowledge and the tools, and the IT teams have the manpower to implement and enforce. And in many organizations, we continue to see that the disconnect there, the usage of different tools, speaking of different languages, having different priorities. And unfortunately, many breaches are a result of the two teams not collaborating as well as they would like to. And I think both organizations want to collaborate. And so crystal ball for me is about how do we help make sure that the organizations are able to work together seamlessly by having tools that work together more seamlessly.
What comes through this conversation and what we all live every day is, I think we all know there's no silver bullet. It doesn't exist. And so, we believe the answer really lies in continuously shrinking the attack surface with technology, digging deeper with analytics and machine learning, and continuing to invest in expert knowledge that can help put context around, the ability to find problems. And so, the way we focus on that is, we focus on our technology covering more of the attack surface and shrinking the attack surface. So that includes adding more webhooks and application logs and fire log logs. And, about a month ago, we launched FIM as a feature in our product, not as a tool standalone, but as a feature. So it just comes with it. And, we look at that as just a way to again, shrink the attack surface more. Secondly, we focus a lot on our analytics and our machine learning. We have the benefit of having thousands of customers that aggregate all of their data into our SaaS platform. And so we can use that big data. We process about 40 petabytes of information a month, which is huge. And in doing that, we continually are finding ways to find what the unknown actors are today and looking for behavioral anomalies. So we're spending a lot of time and money on machine learning. We think that's really the answer. And then, of course, continuing to invest in expertise and context, not only expertise that can be applied to a specific issue, but also, we call it community immunity, where when we see a problem with one customer, can we go to our other thousands of customers and say, hey, there's a configuration problem and your environment is exposed the same way, and they just had an issue. Let's proactively get in front of that and take benefit from those types of things too. So, so it really goes back to where I started the conversation for us, is how do we invest in our technology to expand the breadth of our coverage and shrink the attack surface? How do we take that telemetry and that big data and do better machine learning so that we can do a better job with depth? And how do we bring that all together with expertise and do it as close to real time as possible, so that when things do slip through the cracks, and they're going to do that, that we can catch it very quickly and get in front of it?
If I had my crystal ball and I was looking to 2021 and beyond, number one would be kind of blurring the lines between development and security. One of the things I did in my organization was take my security engineers and embed them with the developers so they can learn from each other. It made my developers stronger and it made my engineers stronger, right? And this is kind of the concept of DevSecOps, or if you're a security person, SecDevOps. How do you go that direction? So definitely blurring the lines and then also the organization, making everybody understand that security is their problem. It's not just the people that are holding the title of security engineer or SOC analyst or what have you. So malware, depending on who you talk to and what you do, there's 22 types of malware out there. How do we get smarter about what those 22 are? And then how do we detect all the variants? Because there's got to be some common keys to it. I know there are some vendors out there that are doing really well at kind of predicting that this could be malware. And I think as an organization, we need to accept the fact that if we put automation in place, it may stop a business process. What level of risk are we willing to accept, and then just be able to walk back from that? So I'm agreeing with the XDRs being, the EDRs being pushed out, SOAR being pushed out more. And the last that I'm going to talk about, and I never understood this. I was in the federal government for years. I was a special agent with the Secret Service Electronic Crimes Task Force doing high-tech crime investigations and computer forensics. Every time we went into an organization that was breached, we're like, when's the last time you had a pen test? 2 years ago, 1 year ago. I started thinking, why aren't you continuously doing pen tests in your organization? So one of the things I did in my team was kind of set up a decentralized. All I want you to do is red team, purple team, blue team. And now there's capabilities out there, third parties, that you can hire to do that for you. Defense in depth and using intelligence and using technology to help minimize your attack surface is the what I think is the future.
I have three things: asset management and making sure that my program stays on top and uses some technology to really understand what my assets are, people, process, all of the categories. Also, building out and improving our insider threat program. Not because I think that my company is full of a bunch of insider threats, but because I want to protect the people in the organization from becoming an insider threat, because they could be, they could be attacked and then their credentials become the insider. We are using, I'll give a shout out to my friends at Carnegie Mellon University's CERT program, the insider threat guide that they have in place with 21 best practices. And so we're working towards making sure that we have covered those. And then also something that we haven't really discussed today and could be a completely different hour-long topic is third-party risk assessment and third-party risk. All of us in the room have hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors that we work with. And often that can be a weak link inside of our organizations. And so making sure that we are doing all of the right things, even starting with the contracts and business requirements that we write before we work with a certain vendor, and then putting the right checks and balances in place once we're working with them. So I want to make sure that I have some improvements as my organization continues to expand the third parties we work with.
We've hired a lot of new employees. We've been very blessed to be able to do that. And so things like third parties that we're working with and insider threats are, of course, a big concern for us moving forward. And also just getting ahead of the curve on managing that split between what we hope next year will be in-office work and remote. Also, just thinking ahead to the types of phishing attacks we're going to see as vaccine production continues to ramp up, concerns about seeing phishing attacks related to that. That's something that I'm trying to be very careful and make sure that we're educating our end users about constantly. So definitely really thinking about insider threats, as you mentioned, Summer, third parties, and then whatever threats we're going to see next year, especially as we see attackers really getting used to this new remote work environment and extending attacks, which were mainly targeting VPNs, into other things like compromising the family or looking to target printers and routers and different home automation developments.
We need to recognize that remote work is going to be here to stay. And continuing to expand the education that we're doing for our users to help them understand how to secure their home networks. And then also making it a safe space for employees to come to us with requests for new vendors that they want to work with, different cloud providers and things like that, as well as helping make sure that the employees understand what solutions are currently available to them in the organization, because a lot of times that's not always obvious to the employees. And now that everybody's working from home, they want to find more ways to work more efficiently together.
Folks, very well said. I want to thank each of you for your time, for your insight today. Who says that CEOs and CISOs don't talk? You did a great job today. Thank you so much. This isn't the end of the conversation by any means. It's just the beginning. Please give us feedback on the topics you've heard about today, the opinions you've heard. If you care to join us at a future event, I've got a square for you as well. Come be a part of the conversation. I do enjoy these conversations with CEOs and CISOs, and we'll be back here soon with the next chapter. And who knows, maybe we will be talking about third-party risk and insider risk as well. Until then, for Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your attention today.